Hello and welcome to chapter 14 of our journey through Wuthering Heights. So I hope you've enjoyed all the videos so far. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and leave a comment. And I hope you find this one useful as well. So let's launch into the chapter itself. So here we are, chapter 14. We had a sneak preview of it on the last video, didn't we, as well? So, starting off, she's finished, that's a nice word for letter, epistle. It's a great word, actually, isn't it? And the idea of Nelly tells Edgar Linton about the letter and that she wants forgiveness. But Edgar Linton, he's not a particularly nice guy for all of the way that he's depicted. He's got his hatred of Heathcliff eclipses his love of Isabella, so he's not really a very good brother. And you can say that I am not angry and I'm sorry to have lost her, especially if I can never think she'll be happy. We are eternally divided, and should she really wish to oblige me, let her persuade the villain she has married to leave the country. So this is his very hard line attitude that Edgar shows. You wouldn't write the phrase hard line in an essay, but you get what I mean. So, grumpy old Edgar Linton, I see, is worse than grumpy. Arrogant, really. My communication with Heathcliff's family shall be as sparing as his with mine. It shall not exist. Notice the detachment Bronte uses here. Heathcliff's family. He doesn't even mention his sister by name. He says he's not angry, but he obviously is. Then Nelly goes to pass on this information. She even tries to think, how can she frame it so it sounds better? To spare Isabella's despair. As I came out the garden causeway, I nodded to her, but she drew back, so Nelly goes up to Wuthering Heights, as if afraid of being observed. So Bronte frames Isabella's behaviour very much as someone who's living in fear, constant fear, because she experiences abuse. And actually, in this chapter as well, you'll read between the lines and you get an idea of what disturbing things have actually been happening as well. What a dismal scene is the formerly cheerful house presented. So Wuthering Heights is a miserable, dark place. Had I been in the young lady's place, I would at least have swept the hearth and wiped the tables with a duster. But she already partook of the pervading spirit of neglect which encompassed her. Her pretty face was wan and listless, her hair uncurled, some locks hanging lankly down and some carelessly twisted round her head. So Bronte presents Isabella's appearance. It's being shaped by Wuthering Heights. She's becoming kind of unkempt. And that's thanks to this horrible, oppressive, violent, terrifying atmosphere of Wuthering Heights. And she shows signs of its physical and emotional abuse, definitely, that's happening here. Then Heathcliff is there, but he rose when I appeared. He's looking in his pocketbook, so presumably his records of his money as well. Let's just bring this up a bit. And when I appeared, he asked me how I did, quite friendly, and offered me a chair. So his outward appearance of being a gentleman, so much had circumstances altered their positions that he would certainly have struck a stranger as a born and bred gentleman, and his wife as a thorough little slattern. So he's the one now who looks like he's a gentleman. He's the one who looks refined, but it's like appearance versus reality as well. Slattern is an archaic word, but like a scruffy young woman. And then Mrs. Linton is just now recovering. So Heathcliff really wants all the news about how Catherine is getting on. So Heathcliff is desperate to see Catherine. Before you leave this house, I must exact a promise from you that you will get me an interview with her. Consent or refuse, I will see her. What do you say? So he's determined there. So you have a modal verb there. These are interesting choices of verbs. Consent or refuse, bit of antithesis there as well. It's framed as a question, as an interrogative, but really the pressure is on Nelly to agree, really. I say, Mr. Heathcliff, I replied, you must not, you never shall through my means. Another encounter between you and the master would kill her altogether. And that's probably actually not hyperbolic. And Heathcliff hopes to avoid seeing Edgar Linton. He wants Nelly to facilitate secret meetings between him and Catherine. You have no scruples in completely ruining all hopes of her perfect restoration by thrusting yourself into her remembrance now, when she has nearly forgotten you, and involving her in a new tumult of discord and distress. So you say, well, if you're so fond of her, then why do you want to force your appearance down at Thrushcross Grange and cause all these problems? It's going to make her worse. You suppose she has nearly forgotten me, he said. So this here, look at this. So when she has nearly forgotten him, unfortunately Nelly there, obviously Bronte's writing this, she's created it where it shows Heathcliff's obsession, because Nelly as a character, obviously created by Bronte, is meant to be, she's trying to say and protect Catherine from any further stress. But unfortunately, because of Heathcliff's obsession, obviously it's another big theme of the novel, you suppose she's nearly forgotten me. That's what Heathcliff latches onto. You know as well as I do, for her every thought she spends on Linton, she spends 1,000 on me. So that's going to be hyperbole there as well, and it's an exclamatory sentence. Be true, but your brother is wondrous fond of you too, isn't he? Observed Heathcliff scornfully. He turns you adrift from the world with surprising alacrity. So notice how his language, the language that Heathcliff is used, is more sophisticated, but it's also still full of that cruelty. So he's taunting Isabella. He recognises that Isabella doesn't want anything... Sorry, the other way around. Edgar doesn't want anything to do with Isabella. Also, part of his emotional abuse, he's also in control of Isabella's communication as well. He said, I told you not to write, beyond this note, and nothing since. No. Not actually, yes, see, that's actually true. She just wrote a letter to Nelly instead. This one, sometimes people misinterpret this. She degenerates into a mere slut. She is tired of trying to please me uncommonly early. Well, that word has undergone change over time. It's undergone actually what's known as pejoration, which may not be a term you necessarily ever need in an essay, but you might do if you're interested. So that word now has kind of negative, sexually promiscuous connotations, and it's kind of used colloquially, if I can say colloquially, sorry. In this case, it just means, again, that like slattern earlier on, like a scruffy, unkempt, degenerate woman is what it means, but not really with any sexual connotations. You'd hardly credit it, but the very morrow of our wedding, she was weeping to go home. So Heathcliff holds Isabella, that Linton personality of, kind of strong, kind of over emotional, but particularly like prone to tears, lachrymose, as I love that word. Anyway, the idea of he's a real contempt for the Lintons and everything they stand for, and he sees that there in Isabella as well. I highlighted all of this bit here along the side because I thought it was Nelly again recognising how Isabella is suffering and that she needs a maid to look after her, really, because she's used to living in a more refined way, if she should acknowledge that. She abandoned them under a delusion, he answered, picturing me in a hero of romance and expecting unlimited indulgences for my chivalrous devotion. Of course, this is kind of ironic because the whole novel is a Gothic romance. So in many ways, it's what we would think of as kind of postmodern, really. It's almost like a postmodern reference to the genre itself that the novel is actually in. Postmodernism didn't exist in the time that Bronte was writing, so it's not actually postmodernism, but it's still an interesting kind of self-referential moment there that in some ways reminds us that we are still hearing a story as well, aren't we? But again, young women of that era would be more likely to be readers. They would be... Men generally read non-fiction, and I suppose this is still mainly true today generally, but even more so in those days. And so young women would be reading novels particularly, but they did, men did read them as well in that era too, of course. But they were always worried that young women's minds could be led astray by things that they've read, because novels were still relatively new as a genre and form of writing. So they were worried sometimes about romantic notions getting inside young women's heads, and that could be the implication of what's happened here, maybe in some ways, but very, very subtly. Then a piece of appalling intelligence that I had actually succeeded in making her hate me. A positive labour of Hercules, I assure you. If it be achieved, I have cause to return thanks. So Bronte clearly asserts Heathcliff's antagonistic state because he revels in the fact that he has generated such hate in Isabella. He's managed to make this really good, naive, innocent young woman foster hatred and feel that emotion for him. He's pleased about it. The first thing she saw me do on coming out of the Grange was to hang up her little dog. Do you remember that? The little dog was hanging up. And I wish that I had the hanging of every being belonging to her except one. Possibly she took that exception for herself. But this is all signs of his cruelty here. Nor is the depth of absurdity of genuine idiocy for that pitiful, slavish, mean-minded bratch. That is an archaic word that actually means, female dog, but in an insulting manner directed at humans. You know what I mean there. It also begins with a B. It's got CH at the end. Hopefully you know what I mean by now. To dream that I could love her. So look at the derogatory language Bronte gives Heathcliff here. She even disgraces the name of Linton. And so I've sometimes relented from pure lack of invention in my experiments on what she could endure, and still creep shamefully cringing back. Experiments on what she could endure. So there is the use of pragmatics here. You think about hinting at what's being said here is that Heathcliff it's going to be physical abuse, it's going to be mental abuse, and then he's then delight in the idea that she comes crawling back to him every time, and he enjoys this. So again, as I said, Bronte in this chapter really cementing the idea of Heathcliff as a cruel antagonist. We're seeing some really, really evil character aspects of Heathcliff here. Then, but tell him also to set his fraternal magisterial heart at ease, that I keep strictly within the limits of the law. I have avoided up to this period giving her the slightest right to claim a separation. So, he's so devious. What he's doing is, he will be hitting her. He is going to be mentally and emotionally and physically abusing her. But he's making sure he keeps within the law of the time. And of course, the law of the time was that husbands could beat wives, because the law saw a husband and wife as one legal entity. So it was like the husband is hitting himself, was how the law saw it, because of this rule of coverture. The idea of them being of one body. So it also demonstrates Heathcliff's cunning as well. So again, Bronte really cementing the idea of his cruelty, his antagonistic nature here as well. So she can't have any excuse to leave him. That's the idea. So she can't leave him because he's being cruel, but his cruelty is within the law. Then we have, he's a lying fiend, a monster and not a human being. This is Isabella's very accurate summation of Heathcliff. A lying fiend, so that's got hell connotations. Obviously monster as well, not a human being. I've been told I might leave him before, and I've made the attempt, but I dare not repeat it. Again, look at what that is hinting, that he must have responded again violently. Dare not repeat it. So she's living in constant danger all the time. If you're called upon in a court of law, you'll remember her language, Nelly. So look how devious Heathcliff is. Again, and the law would favour men in that era. It would always lean towards men, let's say like child custody and separations and these things. It would always lean towards men by default, with some exceptions, but always by default. Look at the violence here. He's seized and thrusted from the room. So very violent, dynamic verb choices. Seized, thrust from the room, return muttering, I have no pity, I have no pity. The more the worms writhe, the more I yearn to crush out their entrails. So there's an extended metaphor there, again linking to nature, linking the idea in this case to predators, because worms are predated, aren't they? They're things that are eaten by predators, like birds will eat them, you know. So it really is the cruelty of Heathcliff. I know I've said that a lot, I feel I'm repeating it a lot, but it's true, it's all in this chapter. Then, I swear that I meditate no harm. I don't desire to cause any disturbance or to exasperate or insult Mr. Linton. I only wish to hear from herself how she is. So, despite all this cruelty, despite what he's done to Isabella, despite what Nelly's seen, he just says, all I want to do is go to talk to her. I don't want to cause any problems. We also find out about, this would be classed as stalking in the modern era. I was in the Grange Gardens 6 hours and I'll return there tonight, and every night I'll haunt the place. So more supernatural Lexis, again, another interesting verb choice of haunt. I protested against playing that treacherous part in my employer's house, and besides, I urged the cruelty and selfishness of his destroying Mrs. Linton's tranquillity for his satisfaction. So again, actually, we've not said so much here, but look how strong Nelly is as a character here. Again, unreliable narrator. Is this exactly as has been happening? Let's make our lives easier and assume that yes. But you don't have to. Still acknowledge that it's an unreliable narrator. But the idea, Nelly is defending Isabella as well. And here we've got Nelly worried about Catherine's nerves and how she's going to respond. She's trying to get better. And Nelly doesn't want to be put in the position where she has to facilitate Heathcliff secretly, clandestinely meeting up with Catherine as she's recovering, and she's worried about the impact it's going to have on her. How the devil could it be otherwise in her frightful isolation? She's unsettled. Let us settle it at once. Will you stay here, and am I to fight my way to Catherine over Linton and his footman? This is effectively an ultimatum from Heathcliff here. Or will you be my friend as you have hitherto, and do what I request? Decide, because there is no reason for my lingering another minute if you persist in your stubborn ill nature. So Nelly does try to, she says, and flatly refused him 50 times. But actually, the way that he says it, he probably would fight his way through. So Nelly has very little choice but to accept, to actually allow this. My journey homeward was sadder than my journey thither, and many misgivings I had ere I could prevail on myself but the missive into Mrs. Linton's hand. But here is Kenneth. I'll go down and tell him how much better you are. So it then jumps back into the frame narration of Lockwood's own illness has been happening in the background, but he's getting a lot better himself. And Lockwood is narrator again at this point, because also there's a dialect word here, isn't there? Dree and dreary. So like kind of burdensome is what that means. Dialect word for the area as well. But we've got, let me beware the fascination that lurks in Catherine Heathcliff's brilliant eyes. I should be in a curious taking if I surrendered my heart to that young person, and the daughter turned out a second edition of her mother. So I don't know really if, again, Lockwood, we know about his narration. He's unreliable as well. I don't think he realises that he'd have incredibly little chance of ever getting together with young Catherine. This is the second Catherine, up at Wuthering Heights in the present day, is where we back are at the end of this chapter. But he's saying, I've got to watch out myself that I don't fall in love with her, and then she turns out to be like her mother. But I think he's got a bit of a high opinion of his own allure, I think. But anyway, so that was chapter 14. So again, like, comment, subscribe, listen to my other videos. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you find it useful. Keep up with your own reading itself, your own exploration, your own ideas. If you get some interesting ideas and you want to pop them in the comments, feel free to do so. And I try to answer them more than I used to in the olden days. So yeah, have a great day or night, whatever you're doing, and keep reading.